Hello there, this is Jack Grayle.
Please support your local law enforcement. We brought to the attention of the county the fact that the jails did not have enough correctional officers in them, our roads did not have enough patrol deputies, and there weren't enough probation services and other public safety services. We brought multiple complaints, multiple grievances, and part of the resolution was that we would support a public safety tax in April that would go to support law enforcement throughout the county. If you care at all about having more deputies on the streets, more correctional officers in the jail, better training, better equipment, better resources, and a safer facility, you will support this tax. Please support your local law enforcement.
The new law creates an obligation when deadly force is used to create within a month an investigative report by the home agency, the law enforcement agency that the officer works for.
You think about a 30-day deadline.
It's a terrible idea. In this case, the officer will be ordered to participate fully by the home agency. They have to participate fully. And ultimately, if it's found out that they withheld any information that was relevant, they could be guilty of a felony.
Yeah, and what you're referencing is this law creates a new class 3 felony called law enforcement misconduct. And one of the bases is leaving out information from a report, right?
So this new law has created this vague standard, right? Them withholding any information could set them up for a felony. Sure. I've done many officer-involved shootings where the officer, to the best of his recollection, is trying to explain what happened. But due to the intensity of the experience, due to the adrenaline, due to the psychological factors, they forget.
There's all kinds of language changes and substantive changes regarding when an officer can use force.
To talk about a solution in search of a problem, all of a sudden we have these new standards. Right. This new law has layered on rules about when you can use it for escape and resistance that I think are flat out ridiculous. It goes on to say that deadly force can be used to prevent escape by someone who committed a forcible felony. The current law says force can only be used to prevent resistance or escape, two very different things, if the officer reasonably believes the person cannot be apprehended at a later date and reasonably believes the person to be arrested is likely to cause great bodily harm to another, and the person just committed or attempted to commit a forcible felony. Well, that's ridiculous. You have these are all three very different things here. And in the past, any one of them would have authorized an officer to use, the tools at his disposal to the best of his discretion to protect the public and himself.
Yep.
And if he used bad judgment, he could be called to carpet for that, either in being fired or a civil suit or even prosecution, if he completely ignored the circumstances of the case.
Right.
Yes. I responded to an actual officer-involved shooting. It was a year ago. It was before this even came into play. But there was a lot of the news cycle was going about officers, using criminal intent to kill, people. And this law is far worse than the news cycles of a year ago.
Yeah.
Because this law imposes very real, you could be prosecuted for, all kinds of, unwarranted homicide by intentionally violating this law. If I were an officer in a split-second decision, it'd be terrible to have to try to think through the pattern this law created.
They now have an obligation to warn before they use deadly force. And what does that say, or what is that?
Right. It says officer make reasonable efforts to ID himself and warn that deadly force can be used unless he has reasonable grounds to think the person's aware of the fact, but once again, this reasonable standard.
Right.
I mean, officers, as you know, anyway, whenever there's an incident like this, the first question they're asked, were you on duty? Were you in uniform? Did you identify yourself? They tend to get asked that anyway.
There's also some talk about prohibited uses of force. So it talks about when you can use force with all this new vague language, but also talks about when you're prohibited from using force. What does the bill say about when you absolutely cannot use force?
Well, it bans chokeholds, and it bans. I'll go through the list first, right? It talks about no chokeholds and removes the intent requirement, because most departments don't, departments generally don't allow chokeholds anyway.
Right.
But by removing the intent requirement, it basically means that anytime you touch someone above the shoulders, you're potentially guilty of violating the law and violating their rights.
Right.
But again, the problem is it ignores the fact most officers, if they're going to go hands-on, it's a grappling situation. They're rolling on the ground. They're struggling to contain someone. A lot of officers receive training too, in jiu-jitsu or street fighting or stuff like that, so that they can respond. It's really hard in that circumstance. If the person you're dealing with is trying to bite your ear, trying to spit in your face, trying to headbutt you, it's really hard not to block with your hand or get an arm bar to push them away from you or pin them while you gain control of their arms. And in any of these circumstances, if you did that, because a person's biting, spitting, headbutting, if you had to block them for just a moment while you restrained them, afterwards they could say, well, he used a chokehold on me, regardless. Even if it'd been something you instinctively did. Here's another one. They can't, this is a good one. You can't tase someone in the pelvis, back, or face. First of all, no department allows people to tase in the face anyway. You're taught to tase toward the center of the body, obviously, when you can. But it completely ignores the fact that if you're tasing someone, usually it's because they're already out of control.
Right.
And what that means is they're not standing there like a target where you can carefully take aim at. They're usually fighting with someone else, whether it's your partner or a member of the public. They're rolling around on the ground. They're grappling. And if that's the case, the one place you can't see is their chest.
Right.
So far better to tase them in the back if they've tackled your partner or if they're pinning a member of the public to the wall than anywhere else.
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Again,
Otherwise, reality of most fights, if they deserve to be tased, they're grappling with someone anyway,
Yep.
face to face. What it does is it removes a valuable non-lethal tool from out of the officer's options.
right.
Because, right. I mean, because now they can't, what are you supposed to do? There's also firing projectiles into a crowd, using chemical agents without warning in a sufficient manner to allow the crowd to disperse. First of all, the fact that if there's an actual, if there's two or three, an officer would only use this basically in a riot,
Right.
Basically.
Right.
So the idea of what is sufficient to warn everyone so that everyone heard it in a chaos, at night, if people are looting, there's a bunch of people running up and down the street, and you need to clear the street or something like that. The idea that everyone has to hear you say you're about to use a chemical agent, I mean, it implies you have a bullhorn with you.
Right.
It implies a large-scale operation with lots of equipment and lots of it, but most departments, if they're going to try to clear a street, they're responding ad hoc in the moment to forces outside their control in a chaotic environment, usually at night. Usually people, we can't tell how many there are, where they're going, and they're just trying to clear an area. How do you guarantee that everyone heard your warning?
Right.
Other than just yelling it out. And even then, what you're doing is creating a target for yourself as you announce, I'm about to do something you're really not going to like, I mean, to people that shouldn't be out there anyway.
Right.
We're not talking about a peaceful protest. We're talking about people that are probably looting at that point.
Exactly. Officers now have an obligation to intervene if they see their partner or another officer using excessive force.
But it's the world's worst rule, because it ignores the fact that in most situations where there's more than one officer present and one officer is engaged in physically using force and the other presumably isn't, it ignores the fact that usually only the officer who's physically engaged can tell what's happening. Two officers, both trying to restrain the same guy, will have very different views of what the guy's doing, of what he's about to do. Officers are trained to tell when the person is about to strike, if they're trying to reach for a weapon, if they're trying to, to bite or something like that. The fact of trying to judge in an instant, especially, what if the other officer is watching it is new? What if he's been training? He's 6 months on the force. He's watching a guy with 15 years, and he doesn't understand what he's seeing.
Right.
He's not only is he not there proximate to the guy,
Yep.
but he's scared, he's untrained, he doesn't know his partner, well, and he thinks, oh my God, it looks like he's punching him for no reason or pinning him for no reason. I've got to do something.
Right.
Or I'll be held liable, and something tragic could occur.
Exactly.
It's far more likely something like that happens.
Yep. Agreed.
Than an officer watching someone, do something that's not justified.
Please support your local law enforcement.